Y'all know what it is.
Hey there, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's guest is ammonia and alternative energy expert Greg Vezina. This episode is a unique one for us in that it was a match made in heaven, totally inspired by the Eggs community. In recent months, we have featured other alternative energy experts on the podcast, including Andrew Murphy and Dr. Amit Roy, to name a couple. But due to an outsized and unexpected reaction to those particular episodes by our community, we've received a number of emails with more and more questions about the future of energy. One such email came in from listener Karim, who sent this message. Dear Eggs, my name is Karim, and I have a question. What do you think of ammonia cars? Because there's a YouTube video about a 1981 Chevrolet Impala that had its V8 engine converted to run on ammonia, which is a mix of hydrogen with a little nitrogen, which makes the exhaust pipe cleaner and it's far cheaper than gasoline. The video he's referring to, as he continued in his note, was created in 2006 by CBC News in Canada and was later run internationally on CNN, featuring today's guest showcasing his then cutting-edge technology. Indulge us for a second while we run the tape.
Tonight, Back to the Future. 25 years later, why hasn't this Canadian's clean, green, hydrogen-fueled machine taken over the roads? Drive a hybrid? Think you're pretty smart? Well, your vehicle may be fuel efficient, but ahead of the curve? Sorry. That prize goes to Greg Vezina. 25 years ago, he found fame by getting his Chevy Impala to run on something he called hydrofuel. So what happened to Vezina and his Chevy? In tonight's Checking In, Pia Chattopadhyay finds out.
Well, here we are. It's the first time I've been in this thing in about 10 years.
Greg Vezina fancies himself a man ahead of the times, and he was 25 years ago. He retrofitted his 1981 Chevy Impala into a car for the future, fueled by what Vezina named hydrofuel, essentially ammonia, which is a mix of hydrogen with a little nitrogen. The exhaust was clean, and it was cheaper to run his car on hydrofuel than on gasoline. Even the energy minister of the day took it for a spin and said he liked it. So did the Governor General. All in all, Vezina thought he had a winner.
Within 5 years, assuming the government attitude towards the technology was proper, it would be available to the consumers.
Yeah! Oh, look at that.
Fast forward to today.
Whoa, that's great, it's open.
There's the fuel of the future. 25 years of rust on it.
Vezina's vehicle sits idle. It still starts, and Vezina still believes it's the cure for the world's energy woes. But he says shortly after his appearance on Parliament Hill back in '81, interest in his idea all but disappeared. Vezina speculates it's because the government owned Petro-Canada, so there wasn't much political will to develop alternative fuels.
What do I say? I mean, you can be right, but you got to wait for history. And that's basically what happened to us. We were right. But history wasn't ready. The world wasn't ready.
Today, nearly every major car maker is working on alternative fuel technologies, predicting consumers will be driving vehicles entirely powered by those technologies as early as 6 years from now. But many analysts say it will be many more years, perhaps as many as 30, before hydrogen-run cars will be clogging our highways because the technology is still so expensive.
There's not enough money to support all of this development that's required. And thus there is a viable role for government to come in and to support some of these initiatives to try to kickstart them to keep them going.
As for Greg Vezina, he's thinking of once again kickstarting his project. 25 years on, he says the dream's still alive, and it may be time to go back to the future again. Pia Chattopadhyay, CBC News, Toronto.
As you can see, even then, today's guest lived on the vanguard of ammonia technology and the future of energy and is still a prominent voice in the space. Thank you, Karim, for your note, and thanks to the community for making this connection happen. Joining us today for a lively discussion about ammonia, hydrogen, and our world's energy future, Please join us in welcoming to the show, Greg Vezina.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to your viewer listener who asked the question. I've got this question for the last 40 years. And as soon as you do a little research on ammonia fuel or ammonia energy, you find out that ammonia has been used as a fuel or an energy source for over 100 years.
Didn't they started using it like the 1800s, and they also used it as a fuel source towards the end of World War II once they ran out of gas. They switched over that.
Yeah, the first streetcars were actually ammonia powered. Now, it wasn't ammonia fuel burned, actually. It was using the expansion and compression characteristics of ammonia gas. So they heated an ammonia cylinder, and then that caused the ammonia to expand, and that drove the streetcars, very much like steam engines. Rudolf Diesel worked with ammonia before he worked with diesel, actually before he worked with coal gas and whale oil, which was the first hydrocarbon. But so ammonia is hydrogen and nitrogen. It's NH3. So it's a big fat nitrogen molecule surrounded by these three hydrogen molecules. And that triple bond is the most difficult, one of the most difficult to break. And so the issue with using ammonia has been either you burn ammonia by itself, which has a very narrow flammability limit, 18 to 22%, or you add a combustion promoter. You add something to ammonia to make it burn better, especially in compression ignition. Or in spark ignition engines, you just juice up the spark, and then you can easily run the car on pure ammonia. But there are a number of additives you can use. You can use a carbon additive. You can use hydrogen as an additive. You can even burn ammonia and oxygen and increase the flammability. So what ammonia is the easy way to use hydrogen, because there is more hydrogen in ammonia than there is in liquid hydrogen. There's actually about 1.5 times as much hydrogen in ammonia. And it's very low pressure, -30 to liquefy it, whereas hydrogen to liquefy is 5 to 10,000 psi and -400, almost -500 C. It takes about 40% of the energy in hydrogen to liquefy it. Well, it's interesting, it takes 40% of the energy in natural gas to liquefy it. And it turns out that you convert natural gas to ammonia and transport almost twice as much hydrogen in ammonia in a natural gas pipeline as you can hydrogen in natural gas. And when you start adding hydrogen to natural gas lines as being proposed, because hydrogen is the least dense thing we have, you'll have even less hydrogen in a natural gas pipeline.
So now,
go ahead.
I've actually heard that hydrogen is corrosive to iron. It makes it brittle. And so if you're running it through a pipeline, an iron pipeline, it can actually cause problems. Whereas if you convert it to ammonia, it doesn't do that. Is that correct?
Yes, essentially, yes. There are serious issues about metal embrittlement in hydrogen. Okay. Now the industry says, "Oh no, we'll figure it out." Well, replacing the entire gas pipeline infrastructure is probably not the way to figure it out. And if it fails, it won't fail at a localized level where the hydrogen is injected and mixed with the gas. It will fail along the entire system because the hydrogen will separate out from the gas. Now, is it possible to do this with low amounts of hydrogen, say 5 or 10% of capacity? Probably. Why? It's insane. I'll give you a couple examples, a couple of great examples of basic grade 3 math, okay?
I don't know. That's a little over my head.
Yeah, I was gonna
It's
say,
hard for our
capacity of
politicians,
my
but
mouth.
it's pretty good for. I get lots of emails from 12-year-olds. Right? Okay, look, you can take our natural gas infrastructure and convert it over to carry hydrogen and ammonia, and increase the global distribution capacity and storage capacity by 25 times. That's a huge number. And let me explain it this way. Right now, we spend roughly 6 months, less 2 weeks, filling up the ammonia infrastructure so the farmers can empty it as fertilizer. Then we spend another 6 months filling it up and they empty it. So we have to build a storage infrastructure for 6 months. If you turn that into a fuel and make it throughput, like other forms of energy, where you're basically refilling the capacity every 2 weeks, we can increase the distribution of ammonia by 25 times. Now, over half the cost of ammonia is distribution. All right. So now let's talk about the pipeline distribution. That's for storage and distribution by truck, et cetera, et cetera. There are ammonia pipelines in the United States, right up from New Orleans up through the Midwest. If we, instead of distributing natural gas, distributed ammonia, we could distribute almost twice the amount of hydrogen in ammonia in our existing natural gas infrastructure. There is no infrastructure in anything on Earth where you can increase its capacity that big, spending no money. So it's a huge opportunity to move to green energy, repurposing a highly underutilized infrastructure. Now, when you do the math on LNG, you find out what the Saudis and everybody else has figured out in the last 6 months, and that is you can make 400 or 500% more money converting gas to ammonia and shipping it to world markets to be converted to energy. And Japan is now firing their coal plants with ammonia, and so is China. Then you can shipping the LNG, because it takes 40% of the energy in it to make it. Then you got to transport it, highly pressurized and refrigerated all the way over to Japan, and then you got to decompress it. So the beauty of ammonia over all other considerations is the simple math. It allows us to better utilize the infrastructure we have that was built for hydrocarbons, switching off hydrocarbons. And even when you make the ammonia from natural gas and vent the carbon, gray ammonia, not green, not blue, not purple, we'll come back to that. The life cycle emissions of ammonia used as a fuel are lower than natural gas itself. So you're better off. So no, it's not a perfect scenario, but it gets us on the transition, lowering the intensity of carbons, and then totally moving away from emitting carbon from fossil fuels. What's very important, guys, that people don't understand is this. The lifetime of most green energy systems is 15 years. The industry says 20. But look, the hydrocarbons that provide 85% of the world's energy exist. What we have, and we have enough for 300 years. What we need to do is to learn to take the carbon out. And we now can do that. There are multiple ways. It's just how much money you want to spend. So it's important to understand the difference between having a resource we can use clean tech to improve and the cost of that, which is $30 a ton, by the way, for carbon, as opposed to replacing it. Now, renewable energy, wind energy, solar energy, these things are totally manufactured from nothing to end use and then have to be disposed of. So let's get back to that grade 3 math. Let's say 80% of the energy that we use is liquid fuels, and the battery guys tell you we're going to replace that all with electricity. Okay, let's do the math. Renewable energy requires 3 times as much as baseload, because the generate, store, and regenerate efficiency is 50%. All right, so we need 3 times as much renewable electricity to replace fossil fuels or hydrocarbons. Okay, now you need a distribution to go with it. You need a grid that can handle that. So let's do the math. 80% of the energy is liquid fuels. We're going to replace that with green electricity. That's 8 times 3. So that's a 24 times increase in generating capacity. Now we got to distribute it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the distribution losses on that much energy over a large area of land are 50%. Ooh. Oh, so now we need 50 times as much green energy. Okay, so now how can we do it? I'll tell you how we can do it. The wonderful article in Forbes magazine by Mark Mills about getting to net zero by 2050. That's real easy. We only have to build a brand new 1,000 megawatt nuclear plant every day and a half starting tomorrow for the next 10,000 days. Now, for those that are against nuclear, we can do it with solar energy. We have to build solar energy capacity as large as the state of New York. Oh, okay, we can do it with wind energy. Same deal. Now, even if we could do it, what's the cost to do it? And there's the rub, okay? I believe it's far cheaper to use technology to mitigate the harm from existing energy sources than it is at this time to totally replace them. And so what the energy policy should be is looking 50 years ahead at where we want to go and doing an economic analysis of what technologies will get us there and what it will really cost. And what you'll find out is that Saudi Arabia will mine every single drop of oil, and so will Russia, and so will the United States. They just won't emit the carbon. But we'll have Justin Trudeau, and our oil and gas industry will be shut down, and we'll be living in caves because we'll be saving the planet.
So there's, like you did your ammonia vehicle back in the 80s. It was an 81 Impala, and you were able to fuel it entirely off of ammonia. Essentially, it was running off of that. Can you, part of the speculation is that that tech didn't take off because the, what's it called? The energy person in Canada is tied to the fuel and gas company. So it wasn't very advantageous to them to switch to an ammonia based vehicle because they'd be losing all that revenue from oil and gas. Do you think that's the reason why your tech didn't take off earlier? And no. Maybe can you break down the process of designing that car and how you built it? I mean, like, what's the R&D like? How long did it take? Is it something that anyone can put a conversion kit on their car and have, you know, an ammonia car?
Okay, first, the politics of the day is what stopped us. But it wasn't because the energy minister was a shareholder. In fact, Canada owned an oil company at the time, Petrocan. You know, that might have had something to do with it. But the reality is this. In 1981, we had a parliamentary committee on alternative energy. And the parliamentary committee reported we should do hydrogen. And it said we have enough electricity that we could move to generating clean hydrogen starting in the 1980s. And it was economic in many, many remote places, and it would only get better. And the government, you know, the Minister of Energy and John Chrétien was there, actually. About 50 cabinet ministers were there when we drove our ammonia car in Parliament Hill, because that was on Constitution Day. It was the day we got our Constitution. We'd have called a press conference the day before. Nobody showed up. So Governor General Ed Schreier, who was a big supporter of us, had the RCMP deliver every MP an invitation to meet the Governor General the next day. All of Trudeau's cabinet showed up and drive the car. Trudeau stepped out on the front steps, looked across the street at the National Arts Center, where he could go and announce he'd stabbed René Lévesque in the back in the middle of the night and had his charter deal, and didn't come over to the press conference. I say to this very day that had Trudeau Sr. come over and seen what we were doing, he would have spent the end of his political career making ammonia the worldwide solution and not on a peace mission that went nowhere. So, but the politics are the politics. And after the Liberals lost, we got a letter from Pat Carney, the Minister of Energy in Mulroney's government, replying to a National Research Council report from 1984 that studied ammonia fuel that said it's viable, it's economic, it's doable, there are no scientific or technical barriers, and it's environmentally superior. And out of all of the alternative technologies we were going to develop, we had to do this one. So Pat Carney wrote us a nice letter saying, we've determined that ammonia won't be viable for several decades, and we're going to make sure. Sorry about you spending several $1 million. Oops. Okay. So then we're sitting there. We spent $1 million. We converted a Chevy. We got a propane conversion kit. We went to the manufacturer. We said, we'll do a deal with you worldwide for ammonia and hydrogen. You got to make it work with ammonia, which means it can't have any brass or copper or certain plastics, because ammonia with those things will cut through it like a hot knife through butter. The system will fail catastrophically within an hour. But if you solve the materials compatibility problems, which are simply using the right materials, you basically can take a propane conversion kit, put it on any car, and get it to run at least on dual fuels, maybe 5%, 10% diesel, 90% ammonia, or if it's a gasoline car, on 100% ammonia. So our approach has been, rather than buying new fuel cells or new engines, there's 1 billion generators on Earth and there's 1 billion vehicles. Before we're going to replace them all with Toyota and Hyundai fuel cell cars and Tesla battery vehicles, we might want to convert the existing ones to run on clean fuel. So there's two approaches going forward. One, our business is based on technologies to produce low-cost green and blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is hydrogen made from a fossil fuel or hydrocarbon. And when you make ammonia, you separate the CO2. It's part of the Haber synthesis process. And once you got it separated, it's pretty cheap to deal with it. Okay? So blue ammonia is ammonia made from hydrocarbon that doesn't emit carbon. In Alberta, 40% of the ammonia that's produced there is carbon free. They have a carbon pipeline and they pump that ammonia underground. But you can convert that carbon, you can add 70% of the ammonia made to the carbon and make urea or carbamide fertilizer, which is a carbon fertilizer. You can make char out of it. And now we've learned you can even make carbon fiber. So what was in the past a negative cost to clean hydrocarbons is actually becoming a positive cost. According to the International Energy Agency, today, if you had a $30 to $50 in Canada, if you in the US it's a little higher, but if you had a $30 to $50 a ton carbon price with no industry exemptions, no 90% exemptions, because Trudeau gave the industry the 90% exemption. So if I'm producing a ton of ammonia, today's carbon price is $40, and a ton of ammonia creates 2 tons of CO2, I should be paying an $80 carbon tax. Well, the cost to eliminate that carbon is $60. So it would be $20 a ton cheaper for me to make cleaner ammonia. But Trudeau gave me a 90% exemption. So it only cost me $8. Now, this is an interesting number that people should know. When Trudeau's carbon tax gets to $170 a ton, The carbon tax on a ton of ammonia should be $340, double the cost to produce it. But with a 90% exemption, it's only be $34. Okay, the cost to clean it is still $60. But Trudeau gave industry a bonus. He said, I'm going to have a clean fuels policy, which is only going to apply to carbon from fossil fuels. It's not going to apply to ethanol, methanol, batteries, wind, solar, nothing else. The only thing that pollutes on Earth is oil. There's no pollution from green energy, from batteries, from wind. It's zero emission. 1-800 bullshit. Give me a call. So what's the cost? So in 2030, industry will get paid $350 a ton to take the carbon out of natural gas and not emit it. Well, it only costs industry 100 ton to make it and 100 ton to distribute it. So we'll pay industry a $200 a ton profit in carbon credits for every ton of ammonia it makes, according to just in time.
Okay.
Well, boys and girls, the rest of the world will have a $30 a ton carbon tax with no exemptions, and industry will convert to ammonia globally in a decade. And in the marine shipping industry, they're going to be there in 2 years.
Yeah, I was.
Man Energy is building ammonia engines for their large ships, and shipping causes 15% of the global pollution. And those brand new engines are going to be available in 2024. And Man Energy is selling a retrofit to add on any bunker fuel engine by 2025. So if one of the largest energy users in the entire planet can twist its entire supply chain and energy utilization chain in a decade, why the hell can't we do it anywhere else? Well, where they do it, China's doing it in their coal plants. Yeah, they're building 100 coal plants right now, but every one of them will run on 40% ammonia, 60% coal, and have less emissions than our natural gas plants. Japan's doing the same thing. So sort of to finish answering the question, the last place we're going to use ammonia is in the family car, because there are too many reasons to do it elsewhere. Safety, insurance, all the rest. Ammonia won't explode, but it is caustic. It's not toxic, it's caustic. It means it'll smother you, it'll burn you, okay?
It sounds similar to gas. It'll smother you and burn you.
Well, all the safety on ammonia compared to other fuels says it's just basically the same. The injuries from ammonia won't come from fire, they'll come from lung damage. And in fact, there'll be less deaths from ammonia accidents than there would be from other fuels. And the industry says, okay, well, we'll keep the other fuels because if you don't die, it costs us more money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I wonder, so can we maybe just talk a little bit about, I mean, it seems to me like maybe there's a misalignment in incentives, right? I mean, like, why is it that people aren't going for this? Because, I mean, you know, all the reasons you've stated are, you know, seemingly obvious, right? Like, it's clearly a good option. You know, I mean, we had similar thoughts after talking to Andrew Murphy was, you know, well, God, yeah, we should be using hydrogen. Like, what's going on? Why aren't we doing this? And there's a conspiratorial angle or a policy angle, right? Where you go, it's the fuel companies or whatever. But I mean, clearly, I mean, I guess if it's like everything else in the world, there's probably a misalignment and incentive. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and how we can maybe overcome it.
It's economics, guys. Follow the money. Okay, let me say it. Let me say it in a way that everybody can understand. How many companies do you know that can afford to spend 1 year's electricity costs on a 2-day science experiment? Microsoft did. They spent 1 year server costs cooling
underwater
on 2 days of hydrogen fuel cells.
Oh.
Now, so Microsoft can do it for greenwashing. Google can do it for greenwashing. Billion-dollar tech companies with PR agencies can do it. But 99.9999% of every other business on earth can't do it. The only way hydrogen happens is with ammonia. And the only way ammonia happens is if it's cheaper, not the same price. It actually has to be cheaper. And the reason is this: business risk. Business people are not going to gamble replacing their existing diesel generating infrastructure with hydrogen or ammonia fuel cells unless they know that they have a redundancy, unless they know that if they don't work, they'll still have something that will work. And more importantly, when they can buy a generator for $100,000, why they're going to give you $1 million for a fuel cell? They're not. So the barrier to this technology has been cost, plain and simple. And all of the government grants in the world cannot level this playing field. What will level the playing field is full cost accounting. So if we put the real price of pollution from all forms of energy in the retail cost, and then we said, consumer, you can buy whatever you want. And we got a guy in Tennessee that said, by golly, I won't run my car on nuclear waste. And the EPA says, well, no problem there, Jimmy. It costs you $7 million a mile, and you have to pay for your permit up front. Enjoy yourself. Because the bottom line will be industry will move to new technologies if they're economic and if they won't risk their entire business, okay? Ergo, why I say the hope for hydrogen and the hope for ammonia, which is the carrier for hydrogen, is the aftermarket, is the billion existing diesel generators and the billion existing vehicles on Earth, in particular, the large and medium transport vehicles, because you have centralized fuels, you have staff that are trained in materials handling. And this is the important thing to understand that doesn't exist for hydrogen that does for ammonia. There is not an industry safety and handling protocol. Ammonia has been used for 100 years. We ship 200 million metric tons of this stuff around the world. It's used in refrigeration and air conditioning. It's used in chemicals. So we know how to use it. We know how to handle it. We know how to store it. And we know how to transport it. And the standards exist. For hydrogen, we got to build all these. We got to do all these. And so because hydrogen is more difficult to store and transport, why bother? And the proof is in what both Toyota and Hyundai did with their hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. CICERO, which is the Australian government university research organization, developed a technology to split ammonia into hydrogen and nitrogen. There are others who have, but they developed one. And so they put an ammonia fuel tank in the Hyundai and the Toyota fuel cell vehicles. And then they split the ammonia into hydrogen and nitrogen, vented the nitrogen, and ran the fuel cells on pure hydrogen. Okay? There was a bidding war between Toyota and Hyundai for this technology. Hyundai won that one. But guess what? There are two others. There's one from the University of Ontario who we are working with and have a technology agreement with. They have a patent on an ammonia engine, that, which is a hydrogen engine that cracks the ammonia into hydrogen and nitrogen, but it takes the nitrogen off at ambient, which is minus 190. So when you're using that in a cooling and heating application, refrigerated transport, CCHP, it reduces fuel consumption by 20% because the cooling is provided by the nitrogen.
Huh.
So now, yeah, so now in a
Wow.
CCHP application, you're at 80% efficiency, running on pure hydrogen generated from ammonia at, wait for it, 30% of the cost of the same thing on diesel.
So
fuel.
One of the main problems with running a hydrogen vehicle, for example, is it's compressed. The compression, you have to have I think it's a carbon fiber tank, and it's under high compression, and the refueling systems are kind of problematic because of that. Would ammonia solve this issue? Because essentially it's stored in a liquid format, right?
Yeah. There is, there's two ways to store it. I mean, you can store it as a gas as well. It depends on the temperature you're storing it and the pressure, but correct. There is another company called Contact, and they've got a patent on a 98% efficient ammonia to hydrogen separation technology. So that means anywhere where you want to use hydrogen, you can use ammonia, put the separation unit right in front of that. Now you've got pure hydrogen with very, very low storage costs. Okay, that's a big breakthrough, but they also have a patent on a hydrogen fueling station that comes out of this. And this fueling station will fuel hydrogen, ammonia, or batteries. It'll supply 3 times as much hydrogen as a hydrogen station for half the cost.
Huh.
Okay. So what I'm trying to, the picture that I want your viewers and listeners to get is technology can help us, but it can only help us if the governments stop prohibiting it. I'll give you an example. In Ontario, in Canada, the federal government gives a $5,000 battery vehicle subsidy. So they did the research on how much CO2 is eliminated by that battery vehicle and how much per ton of CO2 it costs. And it costs $200 a ton. But wait a minute. There are literally hundreds of ways to eliminate carbon at between 30 and 50 a ton. And because we're subsidizing those battery vehicles, all those other technologies cannot enter the marketplace. And yet those technologies can eliminate 100% of the carbon we emit from fossil fuels for less than 20% of the cost of battery subsidies. So now we got our political leaders, Trudeau and Biden, saying the entire world is going to be on battery vehicles in 2035. Where's the lithium coming from? Where's the cobalt coming from? And let's go back to my original discussion. Where's the electricity coming from? Because if you have more than 2 houses on a street with a high capacity battery charger, you don't have enough electricity on the street. So wait a minute. So let me finish now. So remember I said you have to increase your capacity 25 times? Guess what? It's 50 times if everybody's on battery. Okay. It's impossible. And anybody that says we can get to net zero by 2050 is full of shit. It's impossible.
Well, I was trying to look at the other side of that too, right? I mean, what do we do with all these batteries when they burn out and die? I mean, because they are, finite. Like they don't last forever either.
No, there's zero emissions. Those batteries are made from unicorn farts, and unicorn farts smell like ice cream.
Well, I had heard this figure, and honestly, I don't know if it's true. I've never actually done the research, but I did hear at one point that it actually requires more fossil fuels to create a Toyota Prius than you will ever save in the lifetime of owning that Toyota Prius. And I don't know if that's the case anymore, but I always thought that was a funny thing.
It's close. It's close. A well-running hybrid is as emission-free as any BEV in terms of is level emissions in terms of life cycle. Okay, an ammonia vehicle, it's there. It's right there with a battery vehicle, even if the ammonia is made from natural gas and you vented the CO2. If you don't vent the CO2, ammonia wins across the board in absolutely every category. And again, there's different colors of ammonia or hydrogen. There is what we call gray or brown. That is where the carbon is emitted. Then there's blue. That's where the carbon's not emitted. We do something with it. Sure. And then there's green, which is, according to the zero free, that's electricity that electrolyzes water to make hydrogen and nitrogen ammonia. And they claim that electricity is pollution free.
Well, and like you said earlier,
it's not
though,
pollution free, right? It's not. So, in fact, half the electricity generated in the United States is from coal. So, green ammonia made from coal is actually 3 times as polluting as blue ammonia, and it's almost twice as polluting as gray ammonia today. Now, will that be the case in 5 years or 10 years, 15 years? No, because the life cycle emissions of all technologies over time are reduced because of the economic pressure, the cost. And that's my whole point again. Our governments pick winners and losers. Oh, let's see, we'll do alcohol. Wait a minute. There's only 75% of the energy in ethanol that's used in the fertilizer and diesel to grow it. If you didn't grow it, we'd have 25% more energy. It takes 25% of the energy in hydrocarbons to eliminate the carbon. What are we growing ethanol for?
So
it increased global food costs by 40%. Now, the EU has cut ethanol and biofuels because they claim they're using wood waste, except they're using raw live trees. They've cut it from 7% to 3.9%. Canada, the US, we're increasing it from 10% to 15%. And as soon as you go above 10%, you destroy all the engines, and the automobile manufacturers say we're not honoring the warranties. Why do these politicians do it? Farm votes. Even Al Gore, who broke the tie vote in Congress to give us ethanol subsidies, said 10 years ago it was the worst policy they ever come up with. But Biden and Trudeau, off they go. You see, so this is my whole point. Unless you follow the money, unless we know what the real costs are and put that in the price and let industry and consumers vote with their wallet, we're never going to get anywhere because we can't.
So
Fair enough.
With hydrogen vehicles, it's a chemical process that converts the hydrogen into storage for the batteries, and the batteries power the cars. So batteries are the waste, the product that's coming in and causing, like Ryan was saying, like creating the batteries itself is what's being, the lithium.
It may not be carbon waste, but it is waste.
It is waste. And it's not, what happens when the battery's done? What do you do with it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. With ammonia, wasn't your vehicle, you start it with gas for 30 seconds and then it runs off the ammonia itself, so it's still a combustion engine? Is that what you think is the solution, so we don't have to have the batteries?
There's no question. Well, it's highly technical, but let's sort of cut to the chase so that you and your viewers and listeners can understand. Okay. An internal combustion engine burns a fuel, and it can be any fuel. Okay. We can convert internal combustion engines to run on hydrogen or ammonia in multiple ways. You can use an additive. You can crack the ammonia. You can do compression and burn diesel fuel, get the engine warmed up and unload, go 95% diesel. You can start for 30 seconds or 15 seconds with gasoline and then go 100% ammonia. There are multiple ways to utilize this technology in internal combustion engines. The point that has to be made is this. Internal combustion engines are very, very, very good with batteries, with hybrids. The best propulsion system we could ever make would be an ammonia fueled vehicle with an electric propulsion system, because electric is highly efficient. The problem is storing the friggin' electricity.
Yeah.
So follow me. A lot of the energy wasted in battery vehicles or used in battery vehicles is for heating and cooling. You're in 100-degree or 90-degree weather. You have to have air conditioning. Well, batteries are not real good at converting electrical energy into air conditioning that way. The battery has to be heated or cooled. If the battery isn't heated or cooled, you'll have losses in the battery. So the very best technology is an internal combustion engine that runs on hydrogen, cracked out of ammonia, stored in that vehicle. Now, that internal combustion engine can be an electric engine, and it can drive electric propulsion. And because you have an internal combustion engine, you have waste heat. And that waste heat gives you the heat for the vehicle, or with a heat exchanger, gives you the cooling for the vehicle and gives you the heating and cooling for the battery.
So would this essentially be a combustion engine that is burning the hydrogen pulled from the ammonia, and then the engine itself would have like an alternator that would power the drivetrain?
It makes electricity. Instead of the engine making thrust, making horsepower, it would make electricity. And that electricity would run the electric propulsion system in the vehicle at 99% efficiency.
So essentially your battery would just be to start the vehicle, not to store the energy.
A small amount of storage, because there'll be obviously a certain amount of lag between generating power on demand, right? But we wouldn't need batteries anywhere near the size of what we have today in electric vehicles, and that's the whole point.
So, like,
you could reduce the demand of batteries by 100 times, which means we probably would have the resources to convert a lot more vehicles over to clean fuel than we ever could convert them to pure battery power.
Well, so like a Tesla, for example.
A matter of efficiency? Oh, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
I was just saying, like a Tesla, for example, the battery is the entire bottom of the car. It's the whole bottom of it is a battery. And that
a lot of weight there.
A lot of weight, which is a huge
carry
problem.
around.
So that's why hydrogen's a solution, because it doesn't weigh as much and you have a smaller battery.
Hydrogen's not a solution in a direct comparison, because if you're going to use hydrogen, you got a 10,000 PSI tank in your truck.
Yeah.
Okay. So ammonia, yes. Hydrogen by itself, no. Okay. You'll have to have the most dense fuel or energy carrier you can in a mobile application, and the most efficient powertrain. Okay. So what are they? Electric is the most efficient powertrain, no question. So then people say, batteries are 80 or 98% efficient, and internal combustion engines are only 20% efficient. I say, wait, we got to get that grade 3 math in there. Sorry to confuse you, ladies and gentlemen. That coal you're burning is not 100% efficient. Yeah. That coal you're burning is 30% efficient.
Yeah. Ryan, what were you going to try and say earlier when I cut you off?
Well, what I was going to ask is, so Greg mentioned that, we could reduce the size of the battery, or we wouldn't need total battery storage in an electric vehicle, for example, if we had this little combustion engine cranking energy. But I wondered if it was is it a matter of efficiency that we can't get to like a 1-to-1 replacement in real time that we would need to store? Or, is there such a thing as maybe with some future technology or something that we could get to where we can create enough energy for our needs in real time via this, this platform, running this combustion engine?
You can store 12 times as much energy, BTU to BTU or kilowatt to kilowatt, in ammonia than you can in any battery that's ever existed.
Okay.
Pretty simple.
So then
pretty simple math.
We can just extract that and basically stay ahead of whatever our consumption is.
Yeah, you can't use batteries for energy storage as the only form of energy storage on a vehicle from an energy or exergy point of view, from an efficiency point of view, or from an economic point of view, if you're looking at the real numbers. Okay. There's all kinds of bullshit you can do, but if you want to look at the real facts, no. Okay.
It's just not there. And that, I guess, is just the nature of the stuff, right? It just is molecularly based. It's not that somebody is not allowing it. It's just
in the first place, the technology isn't viable. And in the second place, to supply the electricity to make it viable, the cost is insane. Okay. And what are the environmental consequences of increasing our grid by 50 times?
Well, we're not going to kill any. Whatever good we're doing is probably.
We're not going to kill any caribou doing that.
So I wanted to ask you, and you've sort of alluded to this along the way, but one of the big things that, being the economics is sort of the enemy here, is cost. Can you talk a little bit about where the cost is? Is it in the hardware? Is it in the research? Like why is this so expensive if it's so wildly efficient?
Well, if you're comparing aftermarket to new build, okay, an aftermarket conversion to ammonia all in with the tank, for an average large diesel transport, we're working on a conversion now on one, and we're doing testing at the University of Ontario and Oshawa on diesel and gasoline, ammonia, dual fuels. Actually, we're testing ammonia with everything known to man, from bird shit to cow shit. But anyway, if you're going retrofit, your cost is 25, 30, 50 grand. If you're going new build, your cost is 200.
Oh, wow.
It's okay. And if you want to go fuel cells, please. Has anybody ever run a fuel cell for 10 years? Because diesel engines run for 10 years. They run for 20.
Yeah.
So the average life of a car today is 12 years. Let's see how many of these battery vehicles are running at 12 years. So that's my whole point.
It'll be interesting to see for sure. Well, and so, I mean, I guess to that end then, so that sort of is I guess the practical use for the individual in their household vehicle. But so then I guess is what you're sort of advocating for is at scale, or doing these things at sort of a commercial level, for our tankers, for our whatever, anywhere that's using, a lot of fuel or creating a lot of waste right now. Are we sort of saying that building new is the future versus retrofitting old facilities? And so, I mean, is that what's keeping it sort of out of reach, is that we can't retrofit these old things cost effectively? We need to build new?
Well, it's the opposite. We can't build new cost effectively. You have to retrofit. And what's happened is the technology is not mature, but it's becoming mature. I'll give you two examples. First example I'll give you is Brazil. 30 years ago, Brazil was a net importer of energy. Their economy was in tatters. They were a third world country. The IMF was basically going to take the country. So the government said, okay, we need to make our own fuel, and we don't care what it does. We're going to do it. So they bulldozed 100,000 hectares of rainforest, and they planted a bigger sugar crop. And they started building an alcohol industry. And in the fall or the spring, the monsoon rains came and it washed away all the soil. They said, oh, gee, I guess we got to go bulldoze another 100,000 hectares. And they did it again. And they did it again and again and again and again for 7 years. They bulldozed the entire last year's crop in new growth in the rainforest. And then some Saskatchewan farmer said to them, have you ever heard of tree rows? You plant trees, and then it stops everything from being blown away from the wind or washed away from the rains, etc. So they started planting tree rows. 25 years later, they're a net exporter of energy. There is not any machine that runs on alcohol fuel for transportation sold anywhere in the world that isn't built in Brazil. And the World Bank came in and did a study and said, you guys could spend 10 times the price of imported oil on domestic energy, and you turned out better off because the 10 times stayed and circulated in your economy, creating 30% in net taxes. Whereas the lower amount that you sent all your currency out of your country came back in and bought your assets on 10 cents at the dollar. Okay? So, what is going to happen is we're going to move from 18 or 19 countries supplying the world's energy to every country having something that it can use to make its own energy and decouple it from global energy economics. Well, when you do that, you also do another decouple. Food.
Yeah.
Now, if you decouple energy and food, guess what else you decouple? Economics. You're now independent. You can now afford anything you want. So, the bottom line is that we've got to have our politicians stop picking winners and losers and let real economics do it. And if we do that, we will find that it's a lot cheaper to repurpose what we've already built and paid for, trillions of dollars to build natural gas lines around the world. Why would you build new hydrogen pipelines when you can ship more hydrogen and ammonia in those existing gas lines? Yeah. And so on and so on. The other, another good example beyond the alcohol side is we don't use our waste as a commodity. Washington, D.C., 5 years ago, opened its first waste to fertilizer plant. They were spending $300 million a year in waste disposal. This plant turns a $300 million a year profit. It's so profitable that the 5 states surrounding Washington, D.C. have hired Washington, D.C. to build 5 more plants. Those plants have existed around the world for more than 25 years. Why did it take America 20 years after the rest of the world to start adopting this technology? So again, my whole point is that we don't value waste as a commodity. Do you know the cheapest hydrogen in the world is made from garbage?
Is that where they line the garbage with plastic and capture the gas as it comes out?
No.
Yeah.
You use pyrolysis and you turn the garbage into hydrogen and pure char. Now, you know what char is? The most efficient fertilizer there's ever been known to mankind.
Yeah. So speaking of fertilizer, right? Nitrogen, which is a byproduct of burning your ammonia, is a fertilizer. Is there a way that like a farmer could power his tractor with ammonia, capture the nitrogen, and then use that nitrogen to fertilize his crop?
If you're going to use the ammonia for energy, then there's not going to be sufficient nitrogen recoverable to use as a fertilizer.
Okay.
So you're kind of doubling up, and that won't work. But certainly any farm, and there's a farm in Minnesota today that people can see that has wind generators and solar panels that make hydrogen, and then they synthesize ammonia by liquefying air and getting nitrogen, and then they run the farm tractor on ammonia, and they run the crop drying on ammonia, and they run the generators for the farm on ammonia. Okay, but again, it's not the little ones that are good for us; it's the big ones. Let me give you another example of natural gas. Okay, it's important to understand that ammonia works better, more efficiently than any other fuel. If you build an ammonia plant right beside a natural gas power plant, when you liquefy the air to get the nitrogen to mix with the hydrogen, 18% of what you liquefy is pure oxygen, which right now they just ban. But if you build that ammonia plant right beside that gas plant, and you make enough ammonia to run that gas plant, and you burn that ammonia in that pure oxygen, it's 50% more efficient than it was on diesel or coal. 50%. And it's zero emissions. The only thing you get is steam and N2, not nitrous oxides. Okay? Now, you can do that at an existing gas plant, shipping in ammonia and liquefying air there. It takes 11% of the energy in oxygen, in ammonia, to liquefy enough oxygen to burn it. In oxygen, not in air. But it's a 50% increase. So you've got a 39% increase in the efficiency of our natural gas plants simply by using a new technology.
Yeah,
this is my point. There are huge huge economic, social, energy infrastructure benefits to ammonia. Huge, massive.
Well, and I think
if
that
the
there's one thing.
politicians would get out of the way and listen to the science and listen to economics, the whole world would be there. And the whole world is going there. If you search ammonia energy, the biggest companies in the world in every sector are all over it. Total Energy, Shell Energy, BP, Exxon, they're all in it. The coal companies, they're all in it. The biggest mining companies in the world, they're all in it. The biggest shipping companies, they're all in it. The biggest fertilizer companies, they're all in it. I suggest your viewers go to ammoniaenergy.org and just click on the membership list. Because when the biggest corporations in the world have turned the Titanic in 5 years, you should notice. Okay.
I did want to say, or just sort of, put a point on part of this conversation. One of the things that I think is particularly interesting that you're saying, and I think is probably, maybe not the way most people think about it, because we tend to be, all one way or all another. But I think you've mentioned a number of times, that even if it isn't perfect, it's better, and it could be dramatically better. And I think rather than going to this, immediately going to zero emission or zero whatever, everything is, it's what it is today or it's zero. Instead of that, I think it makes sense to explore technologies like what you're talking about. Even if it is a 50% gain, that's still 50% better. And I think I just kind of wanted to call that out, because I think that, throughout this conversation, there's been a lot of instances like that where it's like, okay, well, maybe it's not 100%, but it could be made 50% more efficient. And so then how does that trickle down, right? So I think it's important that we understand that it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Well, that's absolutely right. And it's also important to understand that the third world, they're the places that are going to be the biggest users emerging from polluting energy. Okay, Africa, India. Okay, the amount of energy we're going to require 20 years from now for air conditioning will be a third of the global energy production.
Yeah.
I mean, where is this going to come from? And again, if you look at the third world, there's an inventor in Nigeria who I've worked with. We've been quoted in the Guardian magazine. He invented a technology to take human waste, urine and the rest, and turn it into ammonia gas.
Isn't it? I mean, like, I've heard you can't mix bleach and urine because it creates a gas. It's like noxious.
You'll create you'll create a toxic gas. From chlorine? If you mix chlorine and ammonia, you get mustard gas.
So is urine, not to be like disgusting or whatever, is it ammonia?
Yes.
What is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what our body is full of ammonia. Yes. So anyway, again, giving you the example of Washington, D.C., well, I mean, that was a $1.5 billion project. Well, you're not going to do that in Nigeria, right? Because they're flushing their stuff right in the river, right? Oh, but wait. But you can make fuel out of that stuff we're flushing in the river, and it's profitable. Now, does Nigeria want to do it? No, because they got lots of oil. So it's patented. There's an inventor doing it. There's a bunch of schoolgirls that are running a generator on urine, but the government won't do it because they're in the oil business, right?
That's crazy.
So again, I say to your viewers, use a search engine, search ammonia energy and search ammonia fuel, and you'll see that this is an amazing technology we've had for 100 years. The U.S. government in the 60s did a project called Energy Depot because the 4 out of 5 fuel convoys were destroyed getting to the front line in Vietnam, not counting the soldiers that were killed. So they said, geez, we got to make a fuel of the front line. So they got together all the scientists and they said, what can we do? And they said, I got a great idea. We'll build a portable nuclear reactor. We'll drop it on the front lines of the helicopter. We'll make fuel. What fuel can we make? We can make ammonia. So they hired General Motors. They build ammonia fuel cells. They build ammonia airplanes. They build ammonia, everything. And then it got to the Defense Committee in the Senate. And one of the senators asked the military guy, what happens when they blow up that tokamak? And he said, well, we won't have to fight over that land for 100,000 years. No, and so they killed the whole project. But what they should have killed was the portable nuclear reactor part and kept all the stuff. So 1981, years later, a couple of scientists did a huge study on ammonia for the US military and US government. And they concluded, we should have done this years ago. And again, in 2011, a professor in the US did a study on every piece of information that was known about ammonia energy since the beginning of man. He produced a study, Bill Algren, called the dual fuel solution, and increasing the global ammonia supply of 100 times. And he proved it. And then most recently, there's a wonderful research document produced by Dinser at the university here, who is the editor. It's called Comprehensive Energy Systems. It's 5,500 pages. It's $4,000 US. It is the largest compilation of knowledge on energy that has ever existed in man. Well, hydrofuel is all over it. Ammonia is all over it. So we now, my point is that it takes technology and industry time to catch up. And first movers are not always the first winners. The winners are the people that end up with something that's viable for large sectors. And so again, I really believe that we're far better off using clean tech to clean the existing resources we have and using that to build in the new infrastructure so that we can build in the new technologies that will emerge.
Yeah, I like
do
that.
what you know you can do,
instead
of dreaming of what you can do.
Well, Greg, this has been a really educational conversation. I really appreciate you making time for us to talk about this. Something that I kind of really have a passion about. So thank you for coming on the show.
Well, and I just want to add too that, I mean, this on top of all the hydrogen talk that we've had on this channel in recent history, added this whole other layer, I think, especially this idea of, being able to transport better and that there's actually more hydrogen in ammonia. And it seems like these two technologies really go one in one. And I hate that I'm just now at 40 learning about this because
you're like the rest of the world, my friend. The rest of the world's only learning about it too.
I love it. Well, we'll do our part to spread the good word.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you to your viewer and listener for hammering on you and saying, what about ammonia?
And so, Greg, do you want to tell our listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your company, and if they want to reach out?
Yeah, our company is called Hydrofuel. We have two websites. You can go to hydrofuel.com or you can go to nh3fuel.com.
Okay.
And there's on the left tab of our website is all the research we've done. You can go in and check the stuff we did at the AICHE, all of our submissions to the government of Canada on clean fuels. And the other place I'd suggest people go is ammoniaenergy.org to see how big this really is already and what's coming.
I think that's great. Well, thanks so much, Greg. Like Mike said, I really appreciate you taking some time today to do this. It was an exciting conversation and learned a ton. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys again for having me.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.